It's not just Sophie. This problem is bigger than I thought, and the worms are really starting to make me suffer. I have made some startling discoveries since my last post, and in spite of my best efforts, I still can't rationalize what's happening. I'm going to assume that you're all up to speed with the story so far and just continue where I left off. I can't thank you guys enough for your advice on my last post. Well, I really appreciate the gesture, but I don't think things have panned out quite the way I had hoped. I was recommended a deworming medication called ivermectin, and managed to track down some of this stuff by visiting a farm supply shop. I took a gamble and bought an excessive supply of this stuff, and thankfully the guy behind the counter was stoned out of his skull, and either didn't notice that I looked like a whopping corpse or didn't care. Either way, the only question he asked was, "What for?" And he seemed satisfied with my mumbled response of, "Animals." I think I'm getting better at this deception thing. Having measured and taken 3 times the recommended dose, I convulsed and threw up so hard that I might have met an organ. Those black worms that were fed to me by the imitation of my wife were still inside me, and were making their malice known. I fought to keep another 2 doses of wanting to send them a message of my own down. It had been 4 days since I left, and I finally had a plan. I may have felt half dead, but what remained of me was functioning on pure determination. The sky was cloudless, and the day was so bright that it felt like an insult. At least the window glare probably worked in my favor, I thought. Parked across the road from Harriet's house. This was the last place that I knew Sophie had visited. My Sophie, the real Sophie. She had not returned, but something had come home masquerading as her. There was a chance, however slim, that I might find her here alive. Failing that, I might as well as find out what happened to her. A marked police car rolled up in front of me, just on time. I had called ahead, claiming that there had been an altercation between Sophie and Harriet, bookending my story with half-truths to make it sound easier to weave. I told them that Sophie had gone over to confront Harriet about a missing phone, and I told them a friend had heard a commotion while walking past that night, shouting and things being thrown. I told them that Harriet was unpredictable with a dangerous reputation, and then I finished with an absolute truth. I told that Sophia hadn't come home for days and that I was gravely worried. It almost caught on to me when they had asked why I hadn't reported her missing already. I choked on my words, launching into a hack of coughs, but somehow that worked out into my advantage. "You don't sound too healthy yourself," they said, handing me an excuse which I clung onto like a driftwood after a shipwreck. Somehow everything was going better than expected. 2 uniformed police officers approached Harriet's door, one knocking while the other one took a step away to glance around the street. Instinctively, I shrunk down into the car seat as they looked in my direction, then chided myself as I realized how suspicious the move would seem if I were spotted. I awkwardly scooted back upright, and the last scraps of my confidence dissolved when I noticed that the police officers were staring right at me. The window glare had not worked in my favor as I had hoped, and they had witnessed the whole pathetic pogo dance routine. And one leaned in to whisper something to their partner. Both were facing me now, and one took out a notepad. I wanted to shrink back down into the floor well, but told myself to look normal and be normal, and held my ground for a second, until my nose erupted with another enormous nosebleed. I swore loudly, grabbing a thick wad of tissues and holding my face down into it, waiting for the drain of flow to stop. By the time it cleared and I had raised my head, the officers had disappeared into the house. I blinked, relief giving way to despair before it could even take hold. My plan had hinged on witnessing either Sophie or Harriet answering the door, and now I was cast into unknown territory. I waited, weighing my options against one another, but the more I turned them over, the more my plan had came apart, as if held together by the cheapest glue logic could buy. Looking back, it's clear that I slipped into the worst anxiety spiral that I had experienced for years, but at the time, it was nothing so simple. What would I have actually done if Sophie had answered? Ran to her? I had no way of knowing if it was the real her or the imitation. And I could be running into a death trap, or worse. And if it had been Harriet who answered, well, what was I playing on saying? Sophie told me that you were dead. Also, have you seen her lately? And are you sure that it's actually her? At some point, I felt like the conversation had been clear in my head, scripted word for word through a dozen different outcomes, but something suddenly felt so blurry and uncertain. Sweat flooded my face, the road in front of me seemed to stretch on forever, shrinking to nothing, and what was I hoping to gain from being here? The steering wheel pulsed, swelling along with the rest of the car interior. I felt like I was being crushed, running out of space and air. Why was I here? I fought for breaths which wouldn't come, and I fumbled and failed to open the window, painted onto the side of the car door with vomit, and passed out. Blinked back into consciousness to the dull thump of a car door closing. The police were leaving, and I could make out the silhouette of another figure on the back seat, a silhouette with shoulder-length hair. This wasn't Harriet, who wore her perpetual pixie cut with pride. My heart leapt as the thought overtook my blurry mind. That could be Sophie, and she could be safe, but on the other hand, it could be the not Sophie, the imitation thing. She could have been staying at Harriet's house to ambush me, knowing that I would return to track down my real wife, waiting just inside like an eager spider. If that were the case, then the danger had gone, whisked away in the back of a police car. Either way, Sophie was safe, or the danger was gone, and I had to go inside. The oppressive brightness of the day had finally given way to an evening gloom. A handful of keen streetlights had judged it was dark enough to activate, but most were holding higher standards, waiting for nightfall proper. They wouldn't be waiting for much longer, though, because darkness was drawing in. A breeze struck me as I left the car, cutting deeper through my saturated shirt. I caught a glimpse of myself in the wing mirror, a corpse clad in a pallid canvas of puke and blood. Would Sophie even recognize me like this? No matter. All I could think about was finding her, or finding evidence of what had happened to her. While there was still a chance that she was still alive, I had to try. I had to go inside. I had to. The house sat detached from its neighbors, identical buildings with identical lawns and driveways, aside from their numbers. It was an odd flourish of colored curtains laid by particularly daring residents. There was nothing to tell them apart, as was the way with many of the new-build estates. It was, of course, the interior that mattered, where the mask gave way to truth. The street was a graveyard quiet as I flanked Harriet's house, and a side gate led back to the garden, barely waist-height and unlocked. Dark blinds obscured all the windows. Not a glimmer of light was shining through. The place was empty as far as I could tell. None of the windows were open. I pondered the best way to approach entry, and on a whim, I'd tried the back door. With the weight of my shoulder, it clicked open, and I stumbled inside, my knee landing hard on the kitchen tile floor, with a resounding thump. A hiss of pain escaped, and I reflexively clamped my palm over my mouth. The house was dead quiet in response. Pain was shooting through my leg as I hauled myself up and feebly leaned against the countertop. I pulled out my phone and turned on the torchlight as it cast around the room, the beam shaking as I fought to keep my hands steady. Just a kitchen. Oven, microwave, fridge covered with tacky magnets. Kettle toasters, dirty dishes, a vase of flowers. A few days past their prime, I might add. A regular old kitchen. Nothing unexpected. Eerie in the stark spotlight, but just a kitchen. I took a deep breath and continued into the house. The stairway banister cast prison bar shadows upon the wall as I passed. I swept the torchlight around the living room and the bathroom without gleaning much information. And then I saw the door. Set into the staircase, this door either led to a cupboard or a basement. I swallowed with all the ease of ingesting a golf ball. If this house had any secrets, my gut told me that they would be found here. I opened the door, and there were stairs. They went down. My light spilled into the narrow space, barely lighting the bottom of the passage, but enough to show me Sophie. She was standing there in the darkness, the same green dress she had worn when I had last saw her. Her hair was in its usual wavy mess. Her back was towards me, but when she noticed the light, she turned. It was a sluggish movement, as if she was dazed somehow. Her gaze met the lower stairs and then followed them upwards. Her eyes widened when she saw me. She raised an arm, pointed directly at me, took a deep, deliberate breath, and screamed. She screamed at me, her finger extending, a screeching fry of a scream, someone being burnt alive, put through a faulty autotune. It wavered, crackled, and in poor light, her facial features seemed to distort with her voice. She screamed that horrific screamish, and as she screamed, she fell into bugs. She collapsed into them as if her entire form dissolved into particles from head to toe. Only those particles had legs and wings. Some fell to the floor, crawling and writhing. Others took to the air. In a matter of seconds, she became a swarm, and then the swarm started up the stairs towards me. I was already running, my skin crawling and jolts running down my spine. What I had witnessed defied explanation. I wasn't about to hang around and ask questions. Moth wings brushed the back of my neck, and I knew that spiders wouldn't be far behind. I sped around the front of the house, heading for my rental car, but stopped dead. The pitch of the night was pierced by glares from across the street, open doorways spilling light, each silhouetting a single figure. 4 of them? 5? No, 6? The neighborhood had stirred, and they were watching from their doors, standing as still in uniform as their houses. I blinked and somehow was taken aback more by this than the actual bugs. 3 more figures were standing by the car, between me and my escape. Tiny legs brushed up against my shins, the first of the swarm flowing over the top of my socks. I yelped, kicking out as I took off in a flailing sprint down the street, swatting at moths as they dived in front of my face. Through the haze of wings, I saw the neighbors in their doorways, each lit from behind like some 50 Aliens abduction movie. Each of them raised an arm, each pointed at me. Each one echoed the same screech of a scream as I passed them. Doors after doors, it was the same. 10 houses, 14, 20, I lost count. Pointed fingers and piercing screams ringing in my head. On and on, silhouettes and screams as if the whole world had conspired towards my exile. Tears streaked down my face as I ran, longer and harder as I felt that I've ever had. The cloud of bugs seemed to thin. The road led to a forest path, which I took without a second thought. The promise of darkness was far more alluring than the lights that I was leaving behind. I knew I had been seen entering the forest, so I deliberately took a difficult and unpredictable path. I emerged, seemingly a lifetime later, on a quieter street. I was battered and bruised. I was scratched and torn. But I was still breathing, and I didn't stop running until I had put 3 or more roads between myself and the madness. Reason finally took over from panic as I leaned against a lamppost to catch my breath in the night's frigid embrace. I couldn't rely on picking up a trail from Harriet's house. I mean, whatever this was, it had spread through the whole entire neighborhood. It could replicate people, and the entities that they became were capable of working together, coordinating wordlessly. I didn't know whether the Sophie I saw whisked away in the police car was the original or just another copy. If it was not Sophie, I didn't know if the police officers were still human or not, and if they were, I didn't know how long that would remain the case. I needed time. I needed to be away from here, and most importantly, I needed medical attention. I made the most important phone call of my life and requested to be sanctioned in a mental hospital. I told them I had an anxiety disorder and had been away from my medication for days, and I explained everything that I had seen tonight. I explained that, of course, I knew none of this could have been real, and yet I still saw it all. I said that I needed help, and more than anything, I needed to be isolated. My greatest act of deception was to claim that I knew I was mad. I've been treated well since I have arrived, and I have my own room. And since I'm here on voluntary basis, I still have my phone and internet access. There are communal areas which I don't use, and I can leave whenever I want. I don't. I requested a deworming medication and was given some sickly banana-flavored syrup. They won't allow me the dosage I want, but this is better than nothing. I haven't noticed any worms in what I bring up, but I still feel like death. But I'll persist. The nosebleeds still come, but now I can shower and keep myself clean. They bring me strong antipsychotics, and they bring me tranquilizers. I thank the staff, and then I hide them. I've been feeling safe here. The past few weeks have practically breezed by. The horrors I've lived through almost have felt like a dream. Each night, moths gather at my window. They flock to the pane, as if adhering to a massive bulb. Dozens of the creatures crawling all over each other, flexing their wings. And in the movement of those wings, from their shifting formations, her face. But, I try not to look at that.